to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we're going to be talking about, finally, at long last, we're going to be talking about Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. If you have been around this channel for any length of time, you will know that I purchased this book probably back in April, back when quarantine first started. And I was very excited to read it. It sounded exactly like my particular cup of tea. And it was. I loved it. We'll get into that. But it took me so long to read it because over the months I kept picking it up and putting it back down, mainly because the print is so small. This sounds like such a old person problem to have, but the older I get, the more small print is a problem. And I don't mean just like regular size font. This font is tiny. It's so small. So I'd start reading it and I'd get frustrated and I'd put it down, no matter how much I was enjoying it. And a couple days ago I was like, this is enough. This is enough now. Finish it. And I did. And this book was so good. If you love family dysfunction books, you will love this. Sort of suburban dysfunction. You'll love it. You'll love it. So this book is about two families, the Gleasons and the Stanhopes. This book covers a lot of different topics, some very dark topics. It's about generational trauma and the way that we carry our ancestors' pain with us as we grow and get older and turn into adults ourselves. It's about a tragedy, a very unnecessary tragedy. It's about getting lost in pain. It's about forgiveness. It's about love. It's about all of these things, and it was so good. So like I said, there's the Gleasons and the Stanhopes, the patriarch of each family. For the Gleasons, we have Francis, and then for the Stanhopes, we have Brian. We meet them at the beginning of the book. They're both young police officers, sort of freshly out of the police academy, and they're partners briefly for 6 weeks during one particularly hot summer. During that time, Francis, trying to sort all the names out, Francis moves his wife to the suburbs, to a town called Gilham, I believe, and they move there, they buy a nice house, they're getting ready to start their family. Soon thereafter, after hearing Francis talk about how much he loved the town, Brian and his wife Anne move there as well, and they're neighbors. And as time goes by, they start growing their families. The Gleasons end up with 3 daughters, Sarah, Natalie, and Kate. And after a loss, the Stanhopes eventually end up with a son named Peter. Now as the story goes on, we begin to learn more about the families. The Gleasons are a pretty standard run-of-the-mill American family. The Stanhopes first appear to be, but as we get to know them better, we learn that the wife, Anne, she suffers from some sort of undiagnosed mental illness, and it's really bad, and it's really affecting her, and they try to keep it under wraps, but the neighborhood kids start to notice, and it just becomes more and more intense as the years go on. Things reach a fever pitch when the kids, Peter and the Gleason's daughter Kate, they're the same age, when they're 8 years old. They are best friends. They've been best friends for as long as they can remember. They've always played out in the yard together. And as they start getting a little older, they start to, have little crushes on each other. It's very innocent, very cute. But for whatever reason, this really rubs Peter's mom, Anne, the wrong way. And one night they sneak out of the house together for something very innocent, again, like to go to a park or to go play somewhere or go to the river, I don't know. And when they get home, Peter's mom finds out. And this is like the beginning of the end for either of these happy families. That night a tragedy occurs, which ends up with Peter's mom getting a hold of Peter's dad, Brian, his gun. So he's a police officer, she gets a hold of his gun. And this happens right at the very beginning, so this isn't really a spoiler. She gets a hold of his gun, and Peter and Kate kind of run down to Kate's dad, Francis, and tells him. And Francis, instead of calling the police and waiting for them to come and deal with it, he decides to go up and see what's going on. And when the door is opened to him, Peter's mom, Anne, for whatever reason, she shoots him. Sort of point blank, right in the face, and somehow does not kill him. But as you can imagine, that leads to many, 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 many years of rehab, of reconstructive surgery, of just pain and agony for Francis, who was just trying to help a neighbor. So what ends up happening to the Stanhopes is, in place of prison time, Anne gets put in a mental institution, and Brian and Peter move to live with Brian's brother George. And, you know, it's heartbreaking. Not only has now Peter lost his mother, but he's also losing his best friend. And as for the Gleasons, they're just kind of trying to make it day by day and do the best they can. So the rest of the story is about these two families trying to come to peace with what's happened to them, put the pieces together, not grow and stay bitter because of the cards they were dealt. And it's a really powerful story about forgiveness and love. Like I said, all those things, and it really moved me. There were a few times towards the end that I got really emotional, because there were some parts that really resonated with me, with, you know, certain things that have happened throughout life. And it was very intense, and I really, really enjoyed it. So if that sounds like something you would be interested, I definitely recommend checking it out. I give it 2 thumbs up. Just know, if you buy this paperback edition, the print is small. And if you are, you know, if that's going to be a problem. I feel like the main thing for me is I do a lot of my reading in bed with just like a night table light, and it's too dark for me to read small print. Anyway, enough about that. It's a fantastic book. Mary Beth Keane is an outstanding writer. I look forward to reading more from her. So I'll get into a bit of the spoilers now for those of you who like to listen to them. So if that's not you, get the heck out of here, and I'll see you again soon. But so what ends up happening is time begins to pass. We see Kate and Peter begin to grow up, turn into teenagers, finish high school, start to move on with their lives. Like I said, Peter and his dad Brian go to live with Peter's uncle George. After a few years, Peter's dad decides he's leaving New York. He's just leaving, and Peter decides that he doesn't want to go, because, you know, he's settled into school and whatnot. He doesn't want to uproot his life yet again. So George is kind of like, yeah, you can stay with me. And so he does. And once the two kids graduate high school, neither of them has really reached out to the other. For Kate, she doesn't know where Peter is. She has no way to reach out to him. By this point, we're in like the 90s. There's no cell phones, none of that. So she doesn't know how to reach out to him. Peter knows, because of course Kate has been where she's always been, but he's afraid to. He doesn't know what she thinks of him after what his mother did to her father. So as time goes by, eventually Kate decides she's going to go to college in New York, because maybe that's where he is, and maybe she'll run into him. And as luck would have it, eventually she does, and they reconnect, and they fall in love. And it's at first Kate's dad is like, nope, that boy comes from a troubled family. Of course, we know about the mom. Frances also tells her, like, the dad was an alcoholic, probably is still an alcoholic, like it's just a whole thing. He's like, I don't want you getting involved with this boy. And she's like, listen, Peter's different than them, you know. And the dad's kind of like, we don't know that. He's still very young. We don't know who he's going to be. as a fully grown adult, as a middle-aged man. We don't know, and I don't want you taking that risk. But of course, when you're in love, you're in love. And she's like, I don't care. At this point, he's recovered pretty well, Francis. He walks with a cane sometimes. He has a fake eye from the side of his face that was the most injured in the accident. Not accident, but you know what I mean. And so time begins to pass again, and we see them move to a suburb of their own. They buy a house, they start a family. We then start to learn that eventually, and this is like quite a while, like 25, 30 years after she was first put in the hospital, that Anne is going to be released. Her doctors are like, you know what, you've done your time. We have you on a really, really good drug cocktail, for lack of a better word, but like a lot of good prescription drugs that are really helping her with her now diagnosed mental illnesses. And they're like, we know you can do this. And so she gets out, she gets an apartment, gets a job, and then she hires a private detective to help her track down Peter. Because of course, now that she's out and in her right mind, she wants nothing more than to find out how her son is doing. So she tracks him down, and she's too afraid to say anything to him. So she starts parking around where he'd live, and she ends up doing this for years. Until finally we learn that Peter and Kate, who are now nearing 40 themselves, Peter became a police officer like his father and like Kate's father. And now he's kind of gotten himself into the position from not dealing with trauma and just a lot of other things. He's falling down the same path of alcoholism that his father did, and Kate's starting to get really, really worried. Now, Kate has noticed for years that Anne is out and she is keeping tabs on them. She sees it as fairly harmless, so she doesn't say anything to Anne, but she also doesn't say anything to Peter because she doesn't really know if having Anne back in his life would be the best course of action for him. But one night when Peter is hitting the alcohol pretty hard and he's passed out, and she's really worried. She's worried that it's going to start to affect their kids, that it's going to start to affect his job, which it does. She sees Anne parked out across the street from their house, and she goes out and says, I need to talk to you. And she kind of breaks it down for her. She tells Anne that she'd like her to come back for lunch the next day so she can talk to Peter. That happens. At first, when Kate tells Peter, he's like, you saw who? And of course, he's very shocked, very taken aback, very nervous, very scared. Just all the emotions are flooding him. But he agrees. He invites his Uncle George as well because, that's kind of, George has been his rock his whole life, pretty much. So they have a good lunch. It goes well. They start to, not really formal relationship. They're not seeing her often, but they exchange phone calls and Christmas cards eventually and things like that. Anyway, one day things eventually get so bad that Peter concedes to check himself into rehab. And so Kate calls the facility, and the secretary says, great, he has to be here by 7 tonight. And Kate's like, great, he'll be leaving soon. And the lady's like, no, he has to be dropped off here. They can't drive themselves here and then have a car waiting outside. Like, they have to be dropped off and picked up. So she's like, okay. So she tries calling her sisters. They're busy. And Peter's like, call my mom. And Kate's a little nervous. She's like, do you think that she's a danger to the children? And Peter's like, she's absolutely not a danger to the children. Like, she's different now. So Anne comes, and she's with the children. Kate brings Peter off. Anne's with the children. They're having dinner, and then she hears somebody knock on the door. And she stands up and looks at the window, and the kids see their grandfather, as in Kate's father, as in the man who Anne shot all those years ago. And she's kind of freaking out. She's afraid. And he comes in and he sees her and he's shocked, of course. And then what happens next is a beautiful exchange a soft, gentle exchange of forgiveness between him and her. And there's a part where he says that, you know, he spent many years hating her and that was important for him to do. But now as he's standing there and he's looking her in the eyes, he can see for himself that she's very weak and frail and she's a different person, and he offers that forgiveness to her. And he kind of says, like, I don't offer to make her tea, I don't offer any of that, I'm not there, but I forgive her for what she did. And it's such a beautiful scene of forgiveness. And that's so important, not just for the person on the receiving end of the forgiveness, but also for the person on the extending end of the forgiveness. Forgiveness is so important for you, not just the person you're forgiving. And then as time goes by, eventually 33 days later, Peter gets out of rehab, and one night for their 15th wedding anniversary, Kate and Peter are out for dinner, and they are talking about their regrets, all the regrets, from classes they wish they had taken in college to little things, kind of working themselves up to the bigger things. And Peter says that one of his regrets was that he never properly asked Kate to marry them. They kind of just fell into getting married. He never had a ring for her. He always said he'd get her one, and he never did. She just had like the cheap wedding band that they had bought on the day they were getting married. And he said, you know, I regret that. I regret that that's how I proposed to you. I always think, like, if somebody else had married you, they would have had this whole big event prepared. And she says, you know, that's not important to me. That's not important to me. What's important to me is that we're married. But if it bothers you so much, ask again. And he does, and she says yes. And then I was like, oh, that's where the title's from. And I thought that was a very sweet, because the book is very, very full of darkness. It's very dark. Some parts are very hard to read because of that, but that one scene towards the end of the book, and that scene was the namesake. I really loved that's where the namesake came from, rather than one of the darker parts. And then there's an ending that ends up with them all finding out that Brian passed away, Peter's dad, when he was down in Georgia, and they find out that they left him and Anne anything that he had. And there's just sort of the closure to that part of the story, because, you know, throughout his life, Peter's wondering, oh, where's my father? Like, where did he go? What is he doing? Why does he never reach out? Does he think about me and about that part of his life where he had a whole family that he just walked away from? And I was glad that Peter and Anne got that closure that I'm sure they very much needed. So there you go, you guys. This was Ask Again, yes. Recommend. 2 thumbs up. It was great. Do know that it does deal with some very heavy topics, like the ones mentioned and others that I didn't mention. But yeah, it's great. Loved it. If you've read it, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it there for now. I did also want to pose a question to you. I haven't done a weekly vlog in a little while, so if you've made it this far in the video, let me know also in the comments if you missed those, if you would like me to continue doing those. I've been focusing more on book content, but I do also like doing the vlogs, so let me know what you think. And I will see you guys again real soon. Bye.